All right, let's stand up and sing a song about getting to heaven, going to heaven. Here we go. Let's sing this one together. We all know. Sing the wondrous love, sing His mercy and His grace in the legend bright and blessed. He'll prepare for us a place when we all get to heaven. What a day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. You're gonna have to sing out. My voice has gone out for some reason, so sing out. Here we go. Second verse. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, God's will run when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of Him in glory will the toils of life repay. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. On that last one. Onward to the prize before us, soon His beauty will behold. Soon the pearly gates will open, we shall tread the streets of gold. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. See Jesus and shout the victory. You want to do this?
My job tonight, rather simple, is just to introduce the young man, let him come speak, and out his way. Amen? So, I appreciate y'all being here tonight. Dr. Craig is coming tonight to share with us, not about end-time prophecy, but basically about how Israel is at the place it's at today. And one of the things that I enjoyed talking to him the other day, I act like I know the guy, and I'll be honest with you, I don't. His wife works in the on Sunday school for Tabby in the area that she's in, and I said to Craig last week, I said, I hear that you teach preschool as doctor. Your standards are very high at St. Baptist Church. And he said, no, you don't understand. I don't teach preschool. I am the assistant teacher in the preschool. And I informed him, I'm married, I understand. But anyway, we're excited he's here. He lived in Israel. He can tell you a little bit about his life. He lived in Israel, coached baseball in Israel, all of these good things. He just got back to the church in Israel. And so he has walked with many of those who have gone through what's going on in Israel at this time. His expertise is in the Middle East, I guess, is what it really is. He is a professor at no longer Bible Baptist, I think it's Mission University here in Springfield. So we're excited to have him here tonight. His wife is already introduced him, and his son is also with us tonight. So we appreciate you. God, again, we thank you for the day you privilege here. God, what beautiful weather we've had, especially for the month of March. We thank you, God, for allowing us these few days of just amazing weather. We thank you to God for the privilege to be able to come together and worship. And God, I just pray that tonight this would be a time that we would leave here with a better understanding of what actually is going on in our world. So Lord, I am convinced that we look at everything that takes place in Israel as the center of the events that will happen. We love you, we praise you, we thank you for all you do for us. In the name of my Savior Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Great, man.
Thank you.
Introduce your family if you would.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. Hey, has everybody had a chance to see Pastor Ron's fish that he didn't get? I saw him whipping that phone out like it was a grandchild, newborn, 9-pound grandchild. So if you didn't get to see that, I think he'll show you his phone right after. Just ask him, and you may not even have to ask him. I got my pulse finger on. He's a fisherman, so. That's not the most interesting thing about me. My wife, Texas. Well, my son Zach, he's a 7th grader. We're all from Texas. Our daughter is in Tennessee at Union University. So that's the 4 of us. As Pastor mentioned, my wife teaches the pre-K class, and I'm her assistant. And so people often wonder, well, what do you do as an assistant? Well, I mean, I'd look over the crowd, and some of you've probably assisted in some of those kinds of things. You you blow up balloons, you help cut papers and that kind of thing. And on Palm Sunday, triumphal entry story, you need a donkey for the story, right? So I'm the donkey until my knees give out. The kids, that may be one of the most exciting things the kids do is ride the donkey on Palm Sunday, right? So as Pastor said, and I don't want anybody to have a misunderstanding about what I'm going to do tonight. As you can see on the slides behind me, the topic is Israel and Gaza. It's in the news. It's very much in the news. And I suppose had October 7 not happened, we wouldn't be having this conversation tonight. And I'm going to posit to you one other thing. Had October 7th happened in Africa, you have had one blip in the news about this crazy thing that happened, and then it would fade off. The U.S. Congress wouldn't be negotiating a multi-billion-dollar aid package. The President of the United States would not be involved in negotiations for hostages. Just a lot of things would be different had that event happened anywhere besides Israel. You guys have just spent a lengthy time going through the book of Revelation, thinking in these journalists in Jerusalem than any other world. Moscow, Beijing, DC, Israel has more credentialed journalists. Why? Because people in the world don't even understand this, but Israel is the center of God's attention. Jerusalem is the only city in which God has placed his name. So what I want to do this evening is just kind of walk you through how we got here with the Israel-Gaza situation. As Pastor said, I just got back. I took 2 pastors. We went on kind of a backdoor visit. We call it a solidarity visit. We committed to pray with every person who would allow us, but not just to generically pray, but to pray in Jesus' name. We met with hostage families. We met with October 7 survivors from the communities on the Gaza fence there. We met with soldiers. We actually grilled a few meals for soldiers who had come out. One particular, we did a grilling for a special ops group that they do their work at night. So they'd come out early in the morning, got a little rest. We fixed steaks and chicken and burgers and had a wonderful meal with those guys, encouraged them, just explained why we were there. They were quite intrigued that there were Christians in America who had a positive thought about them. So we had a guy from Boston, a guy from Houston, a guy from Missouri, and they wanted to know, what are you hearing in the news? And it was important for us to say, of all the noise that you hear, there is maybe a silent, I don't know if it's a majority, but there's a silent crew here that we don't want to be silent. We want you to understand that we stand with you as born-again believers. They asked questions. This particular group, this special ops unit, they were curious, what's the differences in beliefs and that kind of thing. But when my friend from Houston introduced himself from Texas, the conversation always went, what in the world's going on the border in Texas, right? And these guys understand the needs for borders and border control and that kind of thing. Not that people can't cross borders, but needs to be done in some kind of a fashion that's manageable and orderly and helpful for all who are involved. But these were really, really interesting things. We spent some hours with hostage family. That is a brother of the man that we visited. He's friends of ours. We sat with them for about 4 hours. What I thought was going to be a 1 hour visit in and out lasted about 4 hours. And then at the end, I asked them if they would mind if we prayed with them, and they were very happy. Unbelievers, everybody we met with, not everybody, we met with one believing family. The rest were completely unbelievers, and we asked if we could pray with them, and they joined in like they had done this 1,000 times. We stood in their living room, just in a circle, 4 of us, and just prayed and concluded in Jesus' name, asking God to help them endure the stress of not knowing and hearing various pieces of news that may not be very helpful. We're talking about a 72-year-old man with a 65-year-old brother to be revealed from Gaza and that kind of thing. And the brother's wife has been released, but the brother has not. So they're still waiting. So you can imagine the kind of anxiety that would bring. But we ask God to strengthen and encourage him. We ask for Keith to be released. And we ask for God to do all this in Jesus' name. And they said amen in ways you thought they were Southern Baptists. It was a beautiful thing. Now, I'm not going to try to persuade you in any way that any of the people we spoke with walked away as believers. But they heard very clearly our testimonies of faith in Christ, and that our ideas of what the solution to the problem is. And that's what I want to close with tonight. So I'm going to leave it at that and just say that as we focus here, I don't want you to walk away and go, well, he really didn't even open the Bible. What I want to do is to give you something parallel with the Bible. You guys have been walking through a lot of this material already. I'm going to give you kind of the parallel history of how we got to where we are. So I got a series, just as an intro, a series of photos that you've probably seen or seen similar images. This first one here is of an Israeli tank that this is October 7th, probably about 10 o'clock, overtaken by the militants, and you can see in the photo that there are civilians and armed men, and they're standing in a victory dance on top of the image. Is a bit overwhelming when you think of the firepower of that tank versus just some guys standing on the ground. But the guys standing on the ground won that particular battle, and so these guys are celebrating. This was just not long. It was before noon when the photo was taken. So this happened very, very quickly and by great surprise. And the next photo, here's the aftermath of one of the communities. These are called kibbutz. It's a socialist Zionist movement of communal farms. These are exactly bumping up to the Gaza border fence. This is one that was destroyed. It's a religious Jew. He's praying for the dead over this. This is one way that Israel responded to the attacks. Now, next photo there is, you can see a different kind of approach that Israel has taken. This is the military response. It's from below ground, on ground, and above ground. What you see in the image there is an explosion of some of the tunnels. Israel has been, and the world has been, quite surprised at the number of miles of tunnels that have been concrete tunnels under Gaza that have been used. The billions and billions of dollars not used for infrastructure on top of the ground for aid and help in developing the economy, but used underground for this surprise day of October 7th. The next photo here is what you can see after this is in northern Gaza here. The tanks looking over in that area. It's been a very significant military response. There's no question to it. It's all in the news today. International Tribunal of Genocide. I think felonious charge. There are a lot of civilians that are being killed in Gaza. There's no question about it. This is the nature of war. I see the generation I'm talking to. Some of you have probably been involved in war. Just statistically speaking, though, Israel is averaging. It's not that any civilian that's killed in any war is a tragedy. I'm not downplaying that, but I want to give you some comparison because of the news that you're hearing that Israel is doing genocide. It's just simply as far from the truth as you could possibly be. It's 180 degrees from the truth. Israel is averaging 2.5 civilian deaths to one combatant death. So it's an average 1 to 2.5. One combatant to 2.5 civilians are dead. Now, 2.5 civilians dying is a horrible thing, but the average in Afghanistan, the average in Iraq are between 6 and 8 civilians per militant or a combatant. And that's by U.S. statistics of the U.S. military. That's the British statistics of the British forces in Afghanistan. Civil what Israel is doing in an urban warfare situation. So Israel is being very, very, very cautious. It's not to say some 18-year-old didn't get crazy one day and do something bad. Those things do happen as well. U.S. military, British military, German military, every military will 18-year-old with an automatic weapon. You're going to find one knucklehead in the bunch for sure. But as a practice, Israel is restrained in ways that are just almost unconscionable for the risk that it's putting their soldiers in harm's way. We have a personal story. These stories are personal to us because of our time in Israel. I lived 16 years, and Colleen and I were married, and in the middle of that. And so Colleen was 11 years. Our daughter was born in Israel. So we've spent significant part of our lives in the country, being normal people living there. I was the first non-Israeli to have Israeli life insurance. We bought cars, we looked at buying a house, but that became a little bit tenuous legally in terms of the way the government manages the land ownership and that kind of thing. But our insurance agent was just trying to broaden his clientele base and different things he could sell. So he said, let's give this a try. There's no Israeli life insurance is exclusive to Israelis, but I want to try. He had to go to the insurance board to get it approved, but he got it approved. So we did as much as we could as foreigners to live as normally as possible. I guess Pastor said, I coached the national baseball team fields. You guys are doing the Annie Armstrong offering pretty soon, but Lottie gave us a lot of money on that Christmas offering to build a baseball softball complex. We took a field of wildflowers and made an international baseball softball complex that we could invite Israelis to come in and learn the sport and compete. And if we can brag just a moment, the 2020 Olympics, because of COVID, the Israel national baseball team, Tokyo Olympics, and didn't do bad. They didn't do as good as they could have done, but they couldn't lay down a bunt. That was a problem. So that was pretty disappointing. But when we left, the baseball got better. So I think I might have been a maksom in the Hebrew, a barricade or a blockade for their progress. But those were great days, and we became as normal as we could as foreign believers in Jesus in the land. And so all of these kinds of things are very, very personal to us. So I'm going to tell you a story that just exhibits the cautiousness in which the Israeli military proceeds. Israel's top anti-terror unit. These are guys that train with SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. This is the level. These are the top warriors in the world. I can't tell you how many numbers they have. It's a secure number, but it's on October 7, one of our, we don't quite call him our adopted son, but he's pretty close to that. He's 33 now, and he is one of these warriors. And as he was 40 minutes from the call, when the fence fell down, 40 minutes later, he's in combat. So that's getting his wife and kid into a bomb shelter, and that's getting to a base, getting some kind of equipment on. They took off in a civilian car about 2 miles out from a junction. They were trying to rescue one of their teammates who had been ambushed and had been shot in the chest. They were just trying to get away. They said, we're in a civilian car. You can't take an into this. These things, he said, just RPG hits it, everything. So, hopped out of a car. He got 85 pounds of gear on. They're humping it 2 miles down the highway till they get to a junction where Hamas had taken an Arab Muslim doctor, shot him in the knees, and roped him to a lamppost at a bus stop as bait. And he's tied to this, crying out for help as this group of 4. They normally operate in a team of 5, but they didn't have time to wait for the 5th party to get there. So they get sent out. And he said it was like the Battle of Thermopylae. It was unbelievable, the numbers that came against us. But we were told to go do what you can to hold them back as best you can and try to get to that guy to rescue him. And they're humping it down a highway. I was at that junction a few weeks ago. It was just pretty overwhelming. But there's a railroad track that comes up over the highway that way, and there's a berm here behind the bus stop. And there were however many guys up here, Hamas, how many up on that? There were about 25 altogether. They ran into this ambush, but they slowed down because they saw this Muslim Arab doctor tied to a light post. Now, they'd been running already 2 miles with about 85 pounds of gear on. And so he was walking me through this process. I had to deal with him and figure out what's going on with this cautiously. They all speak Arabic, part of their training. And at that time, they came under fire from every direction. And our boy, I'm going to call him our boy, he actually today. He was the lone survivor of that group. He was shot 4 times and all but bled out. Not a believer, and this has given us great opportunity to get back on this topic of faith. He's had now some months of recovery. 5 his femur. He was shot in the bicep, stomach. His ceramic plates caught that. Once in the, as he quoted, in the buttocks. Yeah, Forrest Gump. He said it's just like Forrest Gump when he was telling me from the hospital. And then the one in the femur. It snapped his hip. Some of you probably had that breakage right up here. And then it just blew the femur apart down in the middle of the shaft. So, but he said, as he was describing, he said that what that did was when it hit me in the femur, it spun me around so that I'm facing this guy that had shot me. And as he comes over the berm to finish me off, well, I just sent him on his merry way is the way he described it. But so these things are not theoretical for us. They're very, very personal. And Moshe he had surgery today because the bone is not doing what it's supposed to do. I don't know what that means. It's a new rod to here. Israel lost in that team of 4. They 5% of them just killed there. Why? Because they stopped to help an Arab, a Muslim. They could have gone on, nobody would have known the difference. They could have shot him themselves and nobody would have known the difference. But the ethics of the Israel Defense Forces is to help. So I want to throw that out there, and maybe I feel overprotective because some of these guys are our boys. They are putting themselves at great risk. So imagine a SEAL Team 6 goes out and 3/4 of them are killed in an operation. That's a significant blow to the U.S. military. Israel has fewer soldiers in this unit than SEAL Team 6. So in the whole unit, it's a higher percentage of their whole unit that's killed when these 3 guys are gone than if 4 or so were killed in a SEAL Team 6 accident, right? So it's a significant blow that they took, and they could have avoided that altogether just by shooting the guy themselves or just running on past him because he wasn't their objective on that mission. But they didn't. They stopped to help. And that cost 3 guys their lives. And a 4th one may not ever come back to service if he's not physically capable because the healing doesn't happen as anticipated it could, right? So the enemy is as evil as you can imagine. They're operating out of mosques, they're operating out of hospitals, they're operating out of schools, all places which are illegal by international war standards. And if you shoot one of these places or go into one of these places, then it's genocide, genocide, genocide. So be careful with what you hear on the news. Every hospital they've been in, they have found Hamas operatives, RPGs, grenades, all that kind of stuff. Every hospital they've been in, every mosque they've been in, every school that they've been in, which is extensive stuff. All right, keep going there, Joe. This is, war brings death and war brings heartache. Here's a Muslim funeral in Gaza. The next slide is an Israeli. It's the Israeli version of this. It's a military. It's a soldier who was killed in combat. This is what happens. Keep going, Joe. Here, this is the grief that happens when Muslims die. The next one is the grief when your family members are taken hostage and killed in actions that are going on. These are all hostage families, by the way. These hostage families are protesting the Israeli government because they're asking the government to give them whatever they're asking for, anything to get our family back. The problem at the moment is Israel, Hamas said today, we're not giving you a list until you move all the military out of Gaza. So they're at a big standstill. And it's a real problem for how our government should proceed because the population is trying to call the government. Imagine in the middle of a war. They've now are protesting the government as much as they're protesting Hamas. This is it's a real problem. So that brings us here to the question, how did we get to this very moment in time? We're 5 months removed from October 7, and I think that this will be helpful to connect the dots of how world history operates. As you've studied through Revelation and pastors walked you through the variety of things that the prophetic word says is going to happen. You wonder, how do these things happen? I want now in the next few minutes here to try to connect a number of these dots for you. So as we think about how does world history move, I think world history moves on the back of two things. One is the rise and the fall of world empires. The rise and the fall of world empires. When we think about world empires, you can think about the Aztecs, the Incas, the Soviet Union. They rose and they fell. They rose and they fell. And they fall for a variety of reasons. The second thing that world history moves on the back of, I think, is the spirit of the age. Some of you are like, what in the world does that mean? We have all lived, by God's grace, the era of COVID. That shaped the way we think. It shaped the way we act. It shapes the way schools function. It shaped everything in our life, whether we were on board with it or hated every second of it. All of us would have to concede everything in the world changed in the way we function, right? So think of it in that way, a TikTok generation. Any of you TikTokers? A few of you, yeah, a few brave hands came up. I've never been on TikTok. I've seen a video or two. I don't know how it actually works, but that means something, right? A TikTok generation or a Zoom generation. A lot of you have become Zoomers and you thought, well, I can't imagine. When 15 years ago, a bunch of you would have said, that doesn't even make sense to me. You're going to do everything like on a computer screen. You're going to talk to people, do school, go to the doctor, do all of that on the. And we all would have said collectively, that seems like the Jetsons. That's too space age, right? And here suddenly, spring of 2020, boom, that fast. It's a whole new spirit. It changes all that we do. So I'm going to suggest to you, if we look at how we got to Israel and Gaza today, there's some important things when we parallel the rise and the fall of a world empire and the spirit of the age. So let's see if we can move forward. Next one, Joe. Here we've got a map. The white part in the center of the map there is the Mediterranean Sea, and all the colors around it represent the size at one period or another of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, if you're not familiar with that phrase, that means the Turkish Empire based out of Istanbul. It was a unique empire in that it lasted some 6 centuries. It's kind of a long time for an empire to exist. Usually in the range of 200 to 300 years is what we know in world history is a movement will last and it will peak and then it will decline. Well, they lasted a little bit longer than most, and so the colors on the map there, they represent kind of various periods, but notice they go all the way out to Algeria. We got Tunisia, Libya, Egypt on the North Africa coast there, and then all the way around in the land that we call the Holy Land or Israel. And then up to Europe, almost all the way, you can see at the top there, almost to Vienna. just a little, very, very close to Venice. So the Ottoman Empire was very, very vast from about the 13th century AD all the way up to the 19th, 20th century. So, but the heart of it was about 600 years from about the 14th to the 20th century. And this was an important deal. Now, why is that important to Israel and God? In the green part here, where it says Alexandria, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, this is the area that we call Israel. I'm going to, for sake of conversation, I'm going to call it Israel or Ottoman Palestine. This was an area from the ancient world that was called the Syrian Palestine or Ottoman Palestine. And so for ease of conversation, I'm going to call it one of those three things there. So what the map indicates there for us is that in the 16th century, that's the 1500s, the Ottomans had a significant interest in Jerusalem. Any of you been on a tour to Israel? So the walls, if you've seen the pictures of Jerusalem, they call them the ancient or old city walls that go around ancient Jerusalem. These were built, they were finished in 1540, and under the leadership of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan of Istanbul, the Ottoman Empire. They were very, very vested in this land. However, that was from the 16th century. As we move forward in time, the Ottoman Empire began to weaken because of the vastness of its size, the corruption of the leadership. People out in the distant lands, they weren't so interested in what's going on in Istanbul. I just want to farm my land. That's all. I just want to survive, right? The other thing that caused the collapse of this great empire, not only was it the vastness of it and the corruption of the leadership, but it was also the spirit of the age. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the 18th century, the 20th century, the Western idea of nation states. That is, we can be independent nations was sweeping. This is the Western ideal. We can be our own independent nation. That started to sweep across the Arab world, so that Arabs didn't want to just be in Arabia, Greater Arabia, as Muslims. We want to be Syrians. We want to be Lebanese. We want to be Jordanians. We want to be Iraqis. And so as that ideal, that Western ideal started to sweep across, the Ottoman Empire was becoming weaker and weaker, and all of these various ethnic groups that they ruled started to say, well, why am I concerned about this corrupt leadership and a weakening empire when we can have our own country? Now, that combines with the final fatal thing that happened to the Ottomans is they joined the wrong side of World War I. And when the Western powers, the Allied powers, won World War I, that put the Ottomans out of business. It took a little bit for it through the League of Nations. So we talk about modern day Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. They divided that land under a mandate that's put a Western power, Britain and France, over control of these areas until they could get it sorted out. So France took control of Lebanon and portions of Syria. Great Britain took mandate over portions of Syria, Israel, and just the northern edge of Egypt. So these things all coalesced so that the Ottomans would lose control of the area and things would begin to develop towards where we are today. All right. Joe, give me that next slide, please. As the Ottoman Empire was crumbling, things were developing in parallel. Nothing ever happens on its own. There's all kinds of things going on around the world. In Europe, you see Theodor Herzl here on the slide. He's not the only Jewish thinker, but he's one of the most notable Jewish thinkers, particularly about the issue of Jewish survivability, particularly in Europe. As the Ottoman Empire is crumbling, European leader for the New Free Press out of Paris, but he was assigned to Geneva. And so he traveled throughout Europe. He hobnobbed with all the important people. And one thing that he noticed in all of the capital cities was Jews, a growing anti-Semitism throughout Europe. Okay, so he publishes here, you can see on the sign here in 1896, he publishes his pamphlet or a booklet called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish. At that time, this is a dream to have a Jewish state. He publishes in 1896. He hosts in 1897. 1897, the last 3 days of August 1897, he hosts the first Zionist Congress. It's going to be an annual event. In the first one, there were 200 representatives from around the world, 16 Jewish agencies represented at this Congress to ask and answer the question, what about the Jews? Not in the way that Hitler was asking, what about the Jews? How do the Jews survive? He saw early on that survival of the Jews in Europe was going to be very, very problematic. Very problematic. He was a half a century ahead of the game. 1897, September 3rd, he writes in his journal at Basel. This is where they had the first Congress, Zionist Congress at Basel, Switzerland. He said, on September 3rd at Basel, I created the Jewish state. At Basel, I created the Jewish state. Now, if I said this publicly, in 5 years, no one would have agreed to it, but in 50 years, no one could deny it. Now, he's a prophet, not in the biblical sense. 50 years, 2 months, 26 days later, 1947, the United Nations voted to divide the land and to create a Jewish homeland. So he said in 50 years, no one could deny it. 50 years, 2 months, 26 days later, the United Nations voted to divide the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. This is really critical to where we're at. Now, let's back up those 50 years. He comes out of that and he is setting up these annual conferences. 1903, they come back from conference saying, and the two questions they want to answer, well, one of the primary questions is, where should the Jewish state be? Okay? They wanted Jewish unity and national identity and the security of the Jews. This was the objective of the Congress to come up with these ideas. His first proposal for where Israel, the modern state of Israel, should be, he offered two options. One, Argentina. Because Article 25 of the Constitution of Argentina encouraged European immigration. Now, interesting enough, Nazis and Holocaust survivors both fled the after Holocaust and ended up in Argentina. It was a kind of a crazy mixture down there. But Theodore Herzl said, you know, they're very welcoming to us. Maybe we could set up Israel in Argentina, or perhaps it could be in Ottoman Palestine, what we call today Israel. In the 1903 convention, they came back. A team had been assigned in 1902 to go out to an area called Uganda today. It was on the edge of Kenya. This was British-controlled area, not many people there. They went out to give it a look-see to see, could this be where we could establish modern-day Israel? They came back and said, we could do it there. But the Congress voted together. That doesn't make sense. That's not where our ancient roots are. Our ancient roots are in what's today called Ottoman Palestine. That's where this needs to be. So he said, yeah, but in parallel, again, remember I said nothing happens just on its own, static. There's always things going on around. In parallel and just ahead of gazillionaire, he had all the money in Europe kind of thing. Money to Ottoman Palestine. What was he happening in Ottoman Palestine? It was, go ahead, Joe. He was shuffling money to buy land, large plots of land where Jews could immigrate and establish Zion. They could establish a modern state of Israel. You see here, I got 5 waves on the board here, 1881 to 1903, 1904 to 1914. The last wave finishes in 1939. Does anybody remember what kind of starts in 1939? World War II, right? Do you remember what was going on around World War II? Anti-Semitism was peaking, right? There was a great need for people to get out of Europe, people, specifically Jews, to get out of Europe, One of the important places they were going was Israel. A lot came to America. Staten Island is famous for those days of early immigration from early 1900s up until then coming through. But in 1939, this was during the British Mandate period, they closed the gate. They stopped allowing Jews to come into Israel. Then the war starts. You know the story. Give me that next slide there, Joe. The next slide here, this is what happens. The Holocaust. And as Jews were slipping out in various ways, they would show up in Israel. They had to jump the fence, or the British would send them back. There's some very famous stories post-war. We're talking about 46, 47, ships of Holocaust survivors showing up at Haifa, Israel, and the British saying, gates are closed. They take them to Cyprus, the next island nearby, and put them in internment camps. What they'd gone through wasn't bad enough. Now they can't come home. They're sent off to prison on an island in the Mediterranean, right? So all of this is flowing. The UN votes to partition the land. All right, as you can see there on this slide here, they partition the land. And they notice the colors here. There's blue in the center and the north, and then down on the edge, which is Gaza today. And then there's the khaki color. Notice the two colors. This is the way the United Nations, in great wisdom, partitioned this land. Notice that it's not contiguous anywhere. You can't get from here to there. You've got to cross borders. You've got to cross enemy territory, if you will say it that way. The khaki color represents what Israel was given. The Jewish state, and the Arab state was given the blue part on that map there, okay? Its vote was approved on November 29th, 1947. It was a vote of 33 to 13 with 10 abstentions. One was absent. The Jewish color, the international zone, red dot with a little orange around it. This includes Jerusalem and the surroundings of Jerusalem, including Bethlehem. This was to be an international zone, theoretically governed by the United Nations or some third party so that Jews and Arabs could have access to this central place that was central to the three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The division is very interesting here, what I call population overlaps. In the khaki-colored area, that is the Jewish state, the demographics would be 55% Jewish, 45% Arabs. 55% Jewish, 45% Arabs. In the blue area, that is the Arab, what was designated to be the Arab state, it was 99% Arab, 1% Jewish, which is pretty reflective of the Arab world today. There's from 1%, 1.5% to 0% Jews in all of the Arab countries today. So it's a very interesting demographic overlap there. In spite of all of those things that you may think, well, that's the layout of the map is not very good. The Jews said, we'll take it. The Arabs said, we won't take it. That is a very big step to where we are today. All right. Give me that next one, Joe. This is May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, downtown Tel Aviv, announces Israel's independence. In other words, the day that's marked as the birth of the state of Israel. That leads us into now independence. Now, the War of Independence is in two phases. One phase has just finished on May 14, 1948, phase one, from November 29, 1947 to May 14, 1948, was a civil war. That is, under the British rule, the Arabs and the Jews were shooting at each other, and sometimes the British got caught in the middle of it. By 1948, March of 48, the British had said they were supposed to be here until August. They were supposed to leave in August, but they said, May's plenty. We've had enough. We're done. So as they pulled out of Haifa, David Ben-Gurion, that previous picture, he announced the independence of the state of Israel. Phase 1 of the War of Independence finished. Phase 2, which is on the board, is really important in what happens here. It becomes a multinational war. The newborn goes to war on May 15, 1948. They woke up in the morning to war. They were surrounded. Armies came. They came from Egypt, from Iraq, from Jordan, and also from Syria. They had additional forces from Saudi, Lebanon, and Yemen came in. So these 7 nations came against this newborn country. People who had just arrived, they don't even all speak the same language. And they're trying to hold at bay 7 nations of armies. And in God's providence, they did. Now, that lasted up until 1950. We got an armistice line in 1940. Well, 1949 took some months until 1950. They got the armistice line again in 1950. There's a war. But the results of this War of Independence, first of all, it's very interesting. The Arabs call it the Nakba, the disaster, because they lost. Now, the Arab armies had convinced the local resident Arabs, do not take the deal. Don't take the deal. Don't take the deal. We will come to help, and we will drive the Jews into the sea. The Mediterranean will be bright red with Jewish blood. This is the literal language they're using, right? And the Jews were fighting for their life. Holocaust survivors had been down that road already, weak and sickly, different languages, all doing their best to hold off. Very, very important and famous stories of fighting this War of Independence. The outcome was this: Israel, the Jewish state, won, the Arab state lost. Because the Arab state never accepted that division, till today they're still not an Arab state. That's why they call it the disaster. Now, what else happened there? Israel gained about 22% more of the land than the UN had designated through defensive war. The Arabs, about 7,000 Arabs were displaced, either because they took advice of the invading armies to move themselves, or they were in a war zone and they were moved out because of war. And obviously a number were killed as well, but 700,000 displaced people from that war. They went into refugee camps, many of them. The numbers you hear today are in the 6 million range. 700,000 70 years later is 6 million, right? It's the only people group in the world. We can talk about the division of northern India to Pakistan and India, or Bangladesh and India, or in Africa, any place in the world that there has been a people group displaced, they've been absorbed somewhere by other nations or surrounding nations, familial nations. There's only one people group in the world. They call themselves Palestinians. They're the only people group in the world who have remained 50 years, 60 years, 70 years as refugees because their Arab brethren refused to take them in. It's one of the tensions in Gaza now. Why you've got 1.6 million people in a city called Rafah at the southern border? Why don't you let them out? Egypt has said, no, we won't take them. Jordan has said, no, we won't take them. Saudi said, no, we won't take them. Qatar said, no, we won't take them. And Egypt could easily open their gate and let them through, but they don't do it. Today, Israel is blamed for, they call Gaza an outdoor prison because Israel surrounded them. So Israel has them blocked on the east, in the north, and they've got a sea blockade on the west, but they don't have them blocked to the south. There's a different country that blocks the gate to the south. That's Egypt. And Egypt has said, we will not open the gate. We won't do it. We're not going to let them come here. We won't take them in, so they will remain as refugees. This is an interesting dynamic in this, and it may help you to see some of the deceptions that go on, some of the deceptions that you've learned about in Revelation that are supernatural, spiritual deceptions. You look at the news and go, this just doesn't make sense. The only people group in the world that has remained a refugee status for all of these years. Why? It's connected to Israel. It's connected to Israel. All right, so here in the map here is I've changed the colors to make it stand out. The yellow in the bottom left is, or the middle left is Gaza. The green is the West Bank. This is the outcome of the War of Independence. Gaza, Israel, the West Bank. This stays in this status until 1967, the Six-Day War. Let's go ahead and get the next slide here. We're building up to the Six-Day War. Arafat and the PLO, I think all of you would recognize he's a fairly famous character. He founds the Palestinian Liberation Organization in May of 1964. What's interesting about that is Israel was not occupying the area that was designated by the UN for the Arab state. Egypt was, and Jordan was, not Israel. So that already starts to set your mind in shape. Well, wait a second. Why are they fighting the Jews if it's Jordan, Arab country, Egypt, Arab country, who are holding their land? That's because it's not about that. It's about the Jews. It's about the existence of Israel. You've heard the phrase already now on all the protests, the activism, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, right? What does that mean? That means from the river, the Jordan River, to the Mediterranean. What sits in the land between those 2 points? Not just the West Bank. What's today Israel proper? Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, all of the areas that are modern day Israel are on that scope. Now, that shouldn't surprise us. The goals of the PLO are 2 things. They're on the board there: Arab unity and liberation of Palestine via armed struggle. Not negotiations, not making deals, armed struggle. Notice Article 2, it's on the board there. Article 2 says this: Palestine, with the boundaries it had during the British Mandate, is an indivisible territorial unit. Can't divide it up. In other words, go back one slide, Joe. In other words, all of the blue area, ours also, because you can't divide it up. The UN was wrong when they divided in 1947. When they divided it, they were wrong. We don't accept that division at all. We don't accept it. Keep going forward now, Joe. Get us back to Arafat here. So Arafat establishes this organization that is going to do their best to lay problems for Israel. For one reason, is to eradicate the existence of Israel. To eradicate the existence of Israel. Okay. All right, Joe, let's go forward here. The Six-Day War. It's 1967. I look over the crowd. You were around in those days. I was 2 years old when this happened, so I know that some of you were a little bit older than that. All right. So what happens in June of 67? June 5th, Israel does a preemptive strike on Egypt. That's in military history, it's an amazing, amazing accomplishment. The jets, they got up just below radar area, flew just above the ground. Radio silence. They had practiced in the house, not in the air. They'd practiced just in a barn what they're going to do. And they go down and they knock out the Egyptian Air Force at breakfast time. The pilots were all in the breakfast hall eating breakfast. One plane got up, one Egyptian aircraft got up, and then it got back down very quickly by the that gave Israel air superiority, and that war in not 1 day, not 5 days, not 20 days, but it's a fun thing on a tour. I'll oftentimes quiz people. You have any idea how long the Six-Day War lasted? And they'll say, was that one of the longer ones? No, this was one of the shorter ones. It was 6 days. And actually, yeah, the War of 1812, when was that? Who's buried in Grant's tomb? I don't know, those kinds of questions, right? So the Six-Day War was a phenomenal thing in modern history. It gave Israel building on in War of Independence in 1948, the David and Goliath motif. David, the small guy, being Israel, Goliath being the Arab world. Today, that's flipped because Israel is such a power in the world that's flipped now, and the Arabs have taken that on as their David, and they've got to beat the big Goliath, Israel, but we'll back up from that. All right, so the outcome of the 6-day war, I can give you all the dates. It's maybe more than we're interested in the morning. Egypt lasted 2 days. The next day, the second day of the war, Jordan got involved. Israel had said, if you get involved, you're going to get spanked and you won't like the outcome of it. We're going to send you to the corner. You'll have a dunce hat on. And Jordan just couldn't resist getting into the war. So they lasted a couple days. And then Syria was involved in the north. They were launching some rockets, but not seriously. And they played with fire and they got burned. They lasted the last 2 days of the war. They extended the war a couple days because Israel had to go north with the tanks, with the aircraft, and knocked out Syria within a couple days up there. So from June 5th until June 10th, Israel was at war these 6 days, and they conquered the surrounding countries. That's Syria in the north, Jordan in the east, and then in the south, Egypt. So that leads us to this map here. Notice the yellow in the top right. That was Syrian territory. That's called the Golan Heights. Israel now controls that still till today. The green part in the middle, this is called the West Bank. Israel has authority over that area at this point. The yellow at the middle left, that's Gaza. Israel now has control of that. Egypt lost that. Jordan lost the West Bank. Syria lost the Golan Heights. And the baby blue at the bottom is the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt also lost that. So Egypt took a big. So Israelis then began to move down to the Red Sea, along the coast of the Red Sea in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula is important to Jews because it's at least the traditional location of Mount Sinai, where Moses came down with the tablets. Israel has a historical connection to this spot. So it became very, very important. And the overwhelming victory put Israel's status in the neighborhood is something to be feared. Don't mess with this little country, right? All right, Joe, let's move forward here. That leads us to 1973. You're starting to get the hint that like every decade there's a big war. It's only because it is. 1973, you may remember Golda Meir, born in Milwaukee, immigrated to Israel as a child, and she rose up in the nation to become a very respected, to a certain point, prime minister. 1973, October War, the Arabs, they surprised Israel this time. It was a very, very big blow to Israel in a lot of ways. It was a costly war by the length of it, a lot of deaths, a lot of finances, and a lot of shame that they were surprised in this way. So that was a very big blow that cost her premiership after the war. She had to resign. Israel licked their wounds and dealt with the shame of being almost defeated by their Arab neighbors, but certainly by being surprised by them, and they were very wounded because of so many men who lost their life in this lengthy war. That then, towards the end of the decade of the 70s, let's go forward, then that moves us to something of a peace effort. So this is, and I think some of you recognize, Jimmy Carter's in the center of that trio, Menachem Begin is to the right, Anwar Sadat is to the. This is the 79 and 78 meetings at Camp David and ironed out a path forward for peace between Egypt and Israel. And then that became known as the Camp David Accords. In 1979, that's when that photo of the handshake was sealed. The deal was sealed, and this is what happened here. So notice in the picture there, the baby blue is gone. That meant Israel agreed to be moved out of the Sinai Peninsula. Israel kept Gaza. Egypt didn't want Gaza back. There's a reason. Egypt did not want Gaza back. So Israel kept Gaza. Israel kept the West Bank. Israel kept the Golan Heights. The only real agreement about land was that Israel would withdraw completely from the Sinai. Now, where did a lot of those people go? They went to Gaza. They settled in Gaza. Now, the first land in Gaza was bought in the 1930s. Nobody was hardly there. Israel bought the first farm in God land to become a farm that became this chain of settlements in Gaza. Okay. So the Yom Kippur War leads to the Camp David Accords. The Camp David Accords leads to a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. By the way, it involved the U.S. because the U.S. was the, I'm going to say the authorizer. They stamped this thing as approved, but it cost the U.S. about $4 billion a year. They have agreed that they will supplement Israel $2 billion and Egypt $2 billion a year. It's an equal amount. So in all of your taxes and my taxes and our taxes are helping to keep this thing going, and it's standing on shaky ground right now. Egypt is considering to pull out of that. If Israel blows the gate open and all the Gazans go to Egypt, Egypt said they're out. They're pulling out of the Camp David. There'll be war. Okay, so the outcomes of the Camp David I've mentioned in stages, moving a lot of those people in Gaza by this point. Okay, now that leads us here to the 1980s. Go ahead, Joe. This is a flag. I doubt anybody in the room can read it. I can't read it either. A couple words in there I can pick out, but this is Hamas's flag. It is the confessional state of Islam. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. If you say that 3 times with a genuine heart, you've become a Muslim. So be careful. And so this is what their flag says. It's the confession of Islam. Keep going. And who is, or what is Hamas? Okay, this is important for us now. We're getting to the issue of how do we get to Israel today. Hamas has two paths here. One is charitable, and one is military. The charitable wing, and it's an evangelistic model for Islam. I just had a guy in from West Africa. He came in to do some training for me, that is to train me in some stuff that he's doing in West Africa. He said our biggest competitor is Muslims, because if they get to a village before, and everybody just falls for that because they've got their social. Islam is pretty relenting on, you better believe. He said our biggest challenge is not and he's in villages where they're literally sacrificing children today. Literally, not figuratively, literally. The pastors at Crossway just came back 2 weeks ago from a visit with him, and he took them to a village and said 4 months ago, right here on this stone is where they had their last child sacrifice. We got here with Jesus, and they've stopped doing that, right? So Islam is competing with Christians in Western Africa into Central Africa, and the Hamas is doing exactly what this Islamic trend is, to bring in a lot of money with hospitals, schools, and a mosque. And he says if they get that foothold in here, boy, it's really, really tough for us to bring the gospel. It's just very difficult. So Hamas has a genuine helps branch. And that's what endears so many people to them in desperate situations. If you're going to feed us, you're going to educate our kids, we're for it. In parallel to that is the military wing, and the military wing is really important here. So I've got here part of their charter statements here. Hamas is a charitable military organization. They were founded in 1987 by Sheikh Yassin. Okay, now here's what their charter says. Who is Hamas? Hamas is Muslims who have given their allegiance to Allah, not just people who have been born Muslims. You're born a Muslim in Muslim theology. Not just who have been born Muslim, but you've taken a step forward. Almost you've been born again in Islam, in that sense that you now are really committing yourself, not to just be born a Muslim, but you now are going to be an active Muslim. You can't be in Hamas unless you believe that. Second thing is there's no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad. This is what the Palestinian Liberation Organization said, through armed struggle. Number 3 here, they're renouncing any part of Palestine means renouncing part of the religion. That is, if you believe in giving Jews any land in Palestine, historic Palestine, then you have renounced Islam. If you don't know, in Islam, if you renounce Islam, you're under a death sentence. This is by Sharia law. Every Islamic country in the world has this in their charters, in their in their government establishing papers, whether it's a constitution or some other monarchy. Sharia law says if you walk away from Islam, you are a kafir, you are a reprobate, you're a traitor to the faith, and you are subject to death penalty. Okay, not every country does that, but it's on the books. So this is what they're saying. If you renounce any Palestine, you allow any kind of state to be here, then you've renounced your religion. That puts people right on edge. The last point here, it's one who strives to raise the banner of Allah over every inch of Palestine. And finally, they're committed to the liberation of all of Palestine. Who is Hamas? They're a charitable organization that is committed to the death of Israel. This is the phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. That means every Jew has two options: go somewhere else or be dead. Those are your two options: somewhere else or be dead. Okay, wrapping up here. Next one there, Joe. Let's pump through this. These are the two leaders of the Palestinian movement. 2004, Yassin was assassinated by Israeli Apache helicopter Hellfire missiles, and Arafat died of possibly natural causes or assisted causes. It's unknown. And so these are leaders of the past, and the question is, are they still leaders for the future? Next one there, Joe. All right. This leads us into the 1990s. That's Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat. They're shaking hands with Bill Clinton in the middle. This was the Oslo Accords. These were secret negotiations that took place in Oslo, Norway. And it resulted in two agreements, Oslo I and Oslo II. In these, the West Bank was now given not completely to Palestinian Authority, but given that this is ostensibly the beginning of a Palestinian nation, though it's not recognized by the U.S. and many, many nations in the world still refuse to acknowledge that it's a nation, but it functions de facto as a nation. The West Bank is divided into three categories: Area A, Area B, Area C. Area A is full Palestinian control. That is police, social services, all of that's under the provision of the Palestinian Authority. Area C is under Israeli control. All of those same things are under Israeli provision. Area B is a joint. The Jewish soldier always, so it doesn't function. So they're really, practically speaking, is Area A and Area C in the West Bank. And we've had various efforts to make this. So if you're reading the news today, there's all kinds of talk about a two-state solution. Two-state solution, this is it. The yellow color is Israel. The orange color is Palestine. The green at the bottom left there is Gaza. Those two are in the two-state solution. This is Palestine. And the yellow in the map there is Israel. This is the hot thing today. Most of the hostage families are calling for right now a two-state solution too. So they've revived Oslo. Now, here's the punchline, okay? The West Bank. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to the Jewish state? The secular negotiators for Oslo, the seculars in the government, they don't care at all. Why do the religious care? The religious Jews care about the West Bank. They call it Judea and Samaria because it's the heart of biblical Israel. It's this patriarchal highway. Genesis 12 through 50 takes place all along the main highway there. It's called Highway 90 today. Shechem, this is the first place mentioned when Abraham comes into the nation. God says, if you'll follow me to a land I will show you. Genesis 12, 1, 2, and 3. God blesses Abraham. By verse 5, he shows up just at Shechem. You've got Shechem on the map there. Shechem, Bethel, Shiloh. Shiloh is where the Ark of the Covenant stood for over 300 years. Then you've got Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron. All of these are the biblical heartland. So the secular negotiators, they don't care one whit about that orange part. The religious Jews care about it because it's This is exactly where Abraham stood when God said in Genesis 13, stand up and look from where you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward, and all the land that I will give to you forever. And he goes on to repeat this over and over and over. You come to the Exodus story. When they come out of the Exodus, God reminds them, I'm taking you to the land that I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When Joshua is taking them into the land, he's reminded, this is the land I gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants forever. Now, there is a movement among Christians today, a very loud movement that says they're an unbelieving country. They're unbelieving. This can't be God restoring them to the land because they're unbelievers. I just want to remind you, throughout Israel's history, overwhelmingly, they've been an unbelieving nation. That's their history. We were studying it second through Ezekiel on Wednesday nights, and it was just amazing how God would come to them and say, you have prostituted yourselves to these idols. And finally he says, enough, I'm putting you out of the land because you have bowed a knee to an idol and another idol and another idol. You can't get enough of it. And then God says there, it's very amazing what he says. He said, you shame my name in the land, then I put you out of the land. And you shame my name among the nations. For my name's sake, I'm bringing you back into the land. For my name's sake. So you've embarrassed me so much in the land, I'm putting you out of the land to punish you, but you've done it worse out there among the nations. Israel's function is Isaiah 42, Isaiah 49 is to do what? To be a light to the nations. And God said, you've embarrassed me so much among the nations, I'm bringing you back. One other point on that, I would mention this. With Ezekiel talks to Edom. The book of Obadiah covers the same thing. Esau. And God says there, exile, you giggled. And because you giggled, you're getting more than they got. You'll be made desolate. So here's what I would say to my Christian brothers and sisters today. It says this can't be because we don't have any interest in what's going on there because they're just a secular country. They're unbelieving. I would say be very, very, very careful. The pattern through Scripture is God protects his children, even when they're in unbelief. Even when they're in unbelief. Be very careful. God says this land is theirs forever. Now, what about the other people? Well, that's covered in the Bible too. God says to them, if someone wants to live among you in peace, you treat them as equals. That means we could, by the Bible, I was talking to a soldier, we were grilling for them. I was saying, by the Bible, I have the right to live here. By the government, I don't have the right to live here. But by the Bible, I have the right to live here because we want to live in peace and worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in truth. We'll help you do the same. He said, I'm not into all that Bible stuff. That's what he told me. He's in the officer's course. We were grilling late one night for the next crew of get into that Bible stuff. Because that's where I go. When you're here fighting to protect a piece of land, what's your justification for it? That the UN voted and gave you the right to live here? Next week, they may vote otherwise. You got to have something more solid than that. I go to the Bible. That's where I look. That's how I come to this point. So what does the Bible say about, don't move forward any further. I'm going to wrap up with this. What does the Bible say about the land? The Bible says the land is theirs forever. Let me just do this one thing. How many of you believe John 3:16? For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. In Hebrew, that word is olam. In Genesis 13, when God says, I will give this land to you and your descendants forever, the same word is there, olam. If we believe when God said, everlasting life, forever life, why would we leave it in the Old Testament when he says, I'm given, and he doesn't say it one time, he says it multiple times. I'm giving this land to you and your descendants forever. How did we get here? We got here because somewhere along the way, people got off from track. What does the Bible say? Even the current government has no idea what the Bible is saying. They miss it completely. But it could all be sorted out, not by more F-15s, F-16s, not by more square meters of land. It's sorted out by Jesus Christ. This was the message we came to Israel a few weeks back to share, is that we support you as soldiers. We know your job is important, but ultimately, the salvation of this nation comes from above. It doesn't come from you being a great officer, a great tank commander, or a great commando. It comes from above. And Jesus Christ is the answer. Last thing I'm going to say here. I know Jesus Christ can change hearts. I met in my doctoral research the first female suicide bomber for Hamas. She was rescued the day before her operation by the Lord. She had her suicide belt. She had her plan. She was going to go into a shoe store and blow herself up. Her replacement, magazine, Wafa Idris is her name. She was a because she did exactly that. Got in an ambulance because Hamas realized Israel was covering the boys too closely. They let the girls go through without inspection. She got in the back of an ambulance as a patient to come into a Jerusalem hospital, drove down Jaffa Street. She got out of the ambulance, walked into a shoe store and blew herself up, killed the proprietor of the store and injured a number of the customers that were in the store. The girl who was originally to do that, I met her. I interviewed her for my doctoral work. And she got rescued by Jesus. And this is the kind of changes that can happen on the Jewish side and the Muslim side. They all are overwhelmingly in unbelief, and they can all be overwhelmingly saved. And that's what we're praying for. Where does your part come in? Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And the peace that we're talking about here is the salvation that comes from above, that sorts out minds and hearts of lost sinners so that they can come together in fellowship on both sides of this political divide. I'm going to stop there. I've exhausted my time and my audience, and my son has had enough. I saw on his face. All right, you're a trooper, buddy. He puts up with a lot of this stuff for me. That you were here. So, Pastor, come on and wrap us up.
Pray, we're going to go home. If you want to talk more to them. Hey, thank you for being here today. Let's look forward. God, we thank you for the day you've given us, Lord, what you've today. We thank you, Lord, for the insight that we've received today. Lord, I thank you for Brother Buddy and the ministry that he provides. I know, dear Lord, that you followed up the second. We're excited about what we'll see take place. God, we do pray for peace. We pray for peace not only in Israel, but Lord, we pray for peace in the world. And God, we know that will come through your blood. God, we also pray for peace in our home. That God, that you be honored and glorified. God, in the same way that you've called Israel to be a light to the dark world, God, you've called us to be that. God, I pray that you allow us to touch somebody's life with the love. In the name of my Savior, I pray. Amen. God bless you. Thank you.